We are doing our February webinar. I know it's normally we do them on Wednesdays, so I might be throwing a few people off for it to be not only is it on Tuesday, but it's the first day back after a 3-day weekend. So people are probably still trying to get in the groove. So I am super excited today. We are going to be doing something a little bit different than what we have done in the past, where it's usually just me and I am just demonstrating how to do things in Blackboard. Today we're going to be talking about something really important that a lot of people are still kind of unsure of, and that is really designing for accessibility. And today I have a special guest with me, Mr. William Shipton, who you can turn your microphone on anytime. He's a little shy. Who is with us today. He's going to be sharing his expertise in accessibility, and we're going to really look at what are the requirements, what are some things that you need to be mindful of, and what considerations do you want to take when you are starting to design courses. So, Mr. Shipton, welcome. How are you today?
Well, thank you for having me here. I'm doing well. Excited to get this going and talk a little bit about accessibility.
Awesome. Why don't you tell us a little bit about your experience and what you do here at Keesler?
Well, I work over at Qualification Training as a programmer. I've been working in training since about 2009 as a developer slash programmer slash designer. And I've really kind of self-taught a lot of things, especially like 508. I've looked into a lot of it so I could actually see what is required and what's not required, and things have changed a lot over the last couple of years. So it's really good that Ms. Garcia is having this little podcast.
Thank you. And yes, so I am really super excited today. So while I know a little bit about accessibility, I am definitely not the expert. And so having you on here to kind of explain a little bit more in depth is really going to be helpful to all of the great folks that we have here today. So basically, the rules of engagement of what we're doing today, I'm going to show you down at the end of our session where you can find some of these tools in Blackboard to assist you, but we're really going to focus on what accessibility is, what are some exceptions, especially when it comes to developing training for the technical training environment and training as a whole. We're also going to look at the different considerations that you need to take when you are designing and developing training, especially online. But the nice thing about what we're going to talk about is that it will definitely apply to your in-resident courses as well. And then finally, we're going to share some resources that you can find for yourself if you want to get more in-depth information on this than we'll have time to provide for you today. I hope everybody got your webinar guide. And one thing that you will find in your webinar guide that I created for all of you is what I call it's called the Design Considerations Checklist. And so what this checklist is really nice, it's on page 11 of your webinar guide. If you go down that list, it'll help you kind of be mindful of the different things that you want to try and include in your course as you are going through, and it will also include some accessibility features. So that's just one of those neat little things that I added for you this time. So, and another thing, I have to always put my disclaimer, we are on the AFNet, so if I lose you, please come back. Okay, so I always have to put that. So let's get into this. In the chat box, if you all could do me a favor and go ahead and kind of type, what do you know about accessibility? Just a really quick little snippet of information about what you actually know or understand what accessibility means. Don't everybody jump at once. Is this thing on? Test, test.
Oh, it's on.
those with the need to know can get it. What you can or cannot access. Accessible to hearing impaired and those with physical constraints. Great. Disabled accessibility. Yes, Mr. Natty, I know you know a lot about Section 508.
Mr. Natty too.
Ability for everyone to get the content no matter what the disability, making things easy to access, making online course content available to those who might have learning challenges. Awesome. Okay, so these are great things. You guys already know a lot about it, but we're going to really kind of focus on what does all that mean? And also, what is categorized as a disability? And also, does it just have to be a disability, or can we play to different learning styles as well when we're making our courses accessible? So let's go ahead and get into it. So first, let's ask Mr. Shipton, what does accessibility mean?
Okay, most of you kind of hit the nail on the head. It's the design of products, devices, services, or environments so as to be usable by people with disabilities. This ensures both direct access, which is unassisted access, or indirect access, which is the compatibility with assistive technology. So in a broad sense, it's just making things accessible for people with disabilities. Now, if we look at it, our stuff we want to think about in the web accessibility context. So web accessibility ensures that there are no barriers to prevent interaction or access to web content. Barriers like visual, I see someone said that, motor or mobility type barriers, which would be difficulty or inability to use the hands. Someone with mild Parkinson's or something like that might have a problem using a mouse trying to actually control the mouse. Auditory, hearing impairments, and that doesn't mean somebody who can't hear completely, but they could be hard of hearing, so we want to think about that. Seizures, so the photoepileptic seizures caused by flashing things on the screen, visual strobes, and then the cognitive and intellectual portion of web accessibility. So people with developmental disabilities or learning difficulties or cognitive disabilities of varying degrees or origins that can't quite learn or have a different way to learn. So we have to take that into account. And finally, we shouldn't confuse the accessibility portion with usability, because it's two different things. Usability is how usable is a product or service to achieve a specified goal for specific people or specific users. So we have to keep those. Accessibility doesn't mean usability.
So I know you and I have kind of talked about it a little bit. One of the things that with disability, and I think is especially prominent here in our military community with so many veterans, is the idea of, you kind of mentioned it with cognitive disorders. So we have to really look at developing courses when we're talking about disabilities, about mental health disorders as well. So like your PTSD, anxiety, ADD, those types of disorders where something in the design or how you access the course could actually be affected as well. Is that correct?
Yes, absolutely. Because, I mean, we are now hiring more veterans. And so more veterans may have PTSD or some cognitive disability, or maybe even flashing screens or anything like that can affect them. So we have to really think about that, especially for this audience that you're going to be designing for.
Outstanding. So we kind of touched on it. Now, what does accessibility mean to us in the Air Force training? I mean, we're in the military. Why do we have to have considerations for those with disabilities?
Okay, so a lot of us develop training that is for the military, and there's not many disabled people in the military. So, but we have to think. maybe in maintenance. Like for most of the courses that we do in Q-Flight, a lot of them are for maintenance folks. There's not a lot of maintenance folks over there that have many disabilities, hearing, seeing, anything like that. But we also develop training for an operations side or for the 3F, the knowledge ops or the admin folks. So those people might have color blindness or some other mild disability that we have to take into account. So we just have to think about what our audience is going to be and who we're developing for. With that said, we also have to remember that 508 is the law. So,
breaking the law. No, so we don't want to break the law. That would be bad. But you know, a lot of time reason that this has not been as prevalent as it is now, and correct me if I'm wrong, that there had been some sort of waivers in place. You know, as long as I've been in technical training, there was this understanding that we sort of had a waiver as far as ensuring that our content was compliant. Why is it such a high visibility item now as, say, in the past? Why are we being hit harder with this and being sure that we need to have more accessible content now than when we were developing training, say, you know, 5 or 10 years ago?
that's a very good question. Now, first of all, yeah, in all my research and everything I looked at, I've never seen an actual waiver that actually said that we were exempt from anything. There were some exemptions, or there are still some exemptions that are in the 508, the new revised 508. So let me get that straight. The 508 we have now is revised and was finished in 2018, so it's different than the previous one. And they're being a little bit more diligent on it. Now, are they going out there and looking at everything we develop? I doubt it. But get back to the exceptions. It used to be if you developed anything that was part of a, what's the word I'm looking for, of a weapon system or a weapon or command and control or some kind of intelligence or cryptologic type mission or even military intelligence missions, you didn't have to comply with 508. So the, I mean, I couldn't say this for to be 100%, but the Electronic Security Command, they have a development section out there. They probably don't, I can't say for 100%, but you know, they probably have a little bit more of a waiver than we have, that's for sure. So the 508 Chapter 2 talks about the scoping requirements, and you know, people can go out there and look at it, and we'll get to the links and where to go find this stuff. But for the most part, all of our stuff doesn't meet the requirements for exceptions. In fact, about the only thing that can be accepted from the current 508 is the legacy ICT stuff. So that's the information communications, information and communication technology. So that's about the only thing that's accepted from the current version of Section 508. Now, there is an undue burden clause. So if you find, if it becomes a burden that you can't do accessibility, then you can file this undue burden. Now, that has a pretty high standard that you have to meet before they'll even consider it. I don't think we could even reach that point.
No, I don't think our AFNet is a good enough excuse.
Right, yeah, that's true.
When there's a lot more technology these days, I mean, even in Blackboard, and we're going to get to into that in a little bit, a lot more technology that we can utilize to make things accessible, and it's not a difficult thing. So that leads me into our next question. So what are some considerations that we need to take when we are designing our courses? So let's break it down simply. What are some things that are some easy things that we can incorporate into our online courses to ensure that our courses are accessible?
Well, most authoring software Blackboard, Articulate, even Captivate will do a lot of the accessibility for you. So you just have to click a button to find out if things are accessible. In Captivate, you just tell it you want it to be accessible. So everything you put in there becomes basically a tag. But you need to make sure that you're putting your alt text in on photos or any other images, descriptions, anything that you place in the authoring tool, any content you place in there. If you don't give it a name or a title, screen readers will just read whatever was in there. So it could have been image546.jpg, and that's exactly what it'll read. So you have to make sure you put your alt text in and your descriptions in. Let's see, what else can we do?
Videos,
Yeah, videos, the
closed captioning.
well, yeah, closed caption. You put your closed captioning, well, closed captioning your videos, or subtitles on your videos, or transcripts, or any other means that somebody can get the text as opposed to listening to it. Is another thing you need to take into consideration. So sometimes you know meeting just the minimum is fine. It'll get you there. You know, if you design for, say, different learning styles, you'll almost automatically or by accident design for accessibility. So if you're thinking in that way, then you could still design for accessibility. That's kind of the way, I mean, if you design for everybody, then everybody's designed for. So.
Now, I love how you say that if, you know, a lot of your authoring tools are going to have, I like to call it the easy button, and that's very true. So if you are in Blackboard and you add a photo, if you notice when that window pops up and you get the little preview of your photo, you have options to add a title and add a description of your photo. That's your alternative text or your alt text, as Mr. Shipton mentioned. So you want to make sure that you add that into whenever, don't just add the photo in and ignore those boxes. Make sure you put either a title or a description into that. And that's one of those easy button things that you don't realize it's already built into the program for you. Another thing is and I have the instructions in the webinar guide for how to do it in Microsoft Word and PDF. Both of those programs actually have buttons where you can click it and have that program check for accessibility within your external documents that you're going to be adding into your courses as well. So you want to make sure that you are taking the time to check those documents before you're adding them into your courses. So I know you kind of talked a little bit about some of the additional resources or, you know, that we can go to find our requirements. Can you talk a little bit more about what some of those are? And I know you have, in the webinar guide, you listed out some outstanding links, incidentally. So Mr. Shipton added several links. On pages 13 and 14 of your webinar guide, there are several links that will take you to more information about accessibility. So can you tell us what some of the key ones that that folks can go to really see what they need to take into consideration when they are developing or trying to make their courses accessible when they're developing?
Okay, well, first and foremost, I think for designers and developers, the best source for them to go to is the WCAG, or the Web Content Accessibility Guide. And they have what's called the WCAG 2.1 reference guide. Basically, you go in there and you just hit all the categories to see if you're meeting the requirement, and if you're not, it'll tell you how to meet the requirement. Now, you have to remember that the WCAG is run by the W3C, the World Wide Web Consortium. And so WCAG is not per se put out by 508. Section 508 folks, they use WCAG. And WCAG comes in two categories: Category A, Category AA. Most of the 508 stuff that we deal with for the United States or for the federal government has to be both A and AA compliant. But the WCAG applies to, it's an international document, so other countries may be using it to apply to their accessibility standards. Now, that's probably the best one that you can actually go to. It's the most comprehensive. Next, you could go to the section 508.gov, and it has all the information about compliance, and it has the CIO DoD section 508 website, which deals a lot with acquisition and contracts. However, it also has a checklist, not necessarily a checklist, steps to be able to determine whether or not you have to make your product compliant. For the most part, when you get down to the end of those steps, it says, is it for education and training? And then it says, go to step 4, you have to be compliant. So basically, you never can get around it. Those are the best websites. Now, if you type in accessibility in Google, you're going to get a ton of hits. I just find that the WCAG and the section 508.gov are probably the most comprehensive. Try to go to the accessibility, accessboard.gov. It's like reading
Stereo instructions.
Yeah, or lawyer script, or it's legalese. It's really tough to read and hard to navigate. So that's why I say go to those two.
So I've actually got these websites pulled up, and I'm going to go ahead and share my screen because I'm going to pull these websites up, and then I'm going to get into Blackboard, and I'm going to show you all some locations in Blackboard on where you can actually locate tools to help you make your course accessible. All right. So screen. Be sharing here in just a minute. All right, can everybody give me a thumbs up if you can see my screen? I like this because I get to see who's paying attention still. Sweet. Thank you, Mark. All right. Okay, so we got several thumbs up. So what you see here, this is the Section 508 Gov website that Mr. Shipton mentions. And where is this the test for accessibility checklist that you were talking about?
The test for accessibility is one of the tools. Now, if you want to see where you can go, if you go to Create up at the top there, just click on that. It's going to bring you to a page that shows you all these different things like documents, software and websites, the video, audio, social, spreadsheets, presentations. Mainly you will go into the software and websites.
I do like that it has all those nice little icons. It definitely is an easy button where you can just go to create and it has all those different formats. Right. So especially for in-resident courses where it talks about presentations, that's a great resource to have because a lot of times I know there's a lot of questions about what you should or shouldn't include in presentations and on your slides. So that's a great resource to have.
And those are really good because like in the document section on that one, it actually tells you how to make Microsoft Word accessible.
Awesome. And I also included that in our webinar guide. So I made an easy button for you all. Okay, so I see here.
So once you're in here, small. Looking for a link here. Accessibility and conformance requirements. That should be right at the top of that first list there.
There's a whole lot of content here.
Yeah. Now, So here's where it'll talk about the scoping requirements. You can go to any of these links, the requirements for authoring tools. Actually, you can go look at the revised standards. If we go
Awesome.
back to create accessible digital, just back one. Now let's see.
One thing I want to point out here is, and I really like this where it talks about universal design. And if you do Google accessibility, that is one thing that you are going to see a lot of. So we talk about accessibility, but usually what is the term that's used in conjunction with that is universal design, because it really does talk about how to design products and services so that all people can use them without too much specialized adaptation. So even though, there are certain disabilities such as, if you are visually impaired, they have screen readers out there. If you're hearing impaired, they have other tools out there that you can use. But universal design is really focused on designing content for everybody. So if you do see that, it's usually synonymous with accessibility. And I did include in your webinar guide what universal design actually is. It is a really, really brief overview of what it is, but you could go and if you Google universal design, you are going to find what I like to say is a plethora of resources. Now, the other website that he was talking about was what do you call it? The WCAG?
We can go back through here, this one here right here real quick. If you can go through the back into the software and websites, there's one other thing I need to show in here. So if you go to the applicability and conformance requirements, and then you'll see there where it says determine 508 standards and exceptions. So these 3 steps here will walk you through to figure out whether or not you have to meet 508 or if you can be accepted from 508. I am. If they're on their computers there, I can walk them through it here from here. The base. Right. And the key there was they're just 3 steps, and usually they end with, is it education and training? So, but don't be fooled by the top because it says buy accessible product and services. Because no matter where you go, that's where it brings you, because it all means the same thing.
Oh, and we are still recording, so I went away, but nobody else did. Okay. So, yeah, so it kicked me out. So no, there was nothing other than questions. So give me just a minute. Yay, thank you. Give me just a minute and I am going to, I try. I just anticipate that it's going to happen. So I do what I can. You just got to keep a good thought, right?
Build it in the time.
Exactly. See, we're a half hour. We've got plenty of time.
There you go.
Okay, so you all should see the Determine 508 Standards and Exceptions screen. So if you are seeing that, then we are good to go. You see that?
Yep, we got it. Okay. I got it over here. Actually, I got it on both screens now.
Great. Right on. Let's go. Let's keep going.
So basically, if you run through, your inventory and your ICT, you don't have to go there, but it's basically you run through these steps. It talks about different content examples, software examples, all these different types of things. Authoring tools, talks about those all. So that's your inventory. The real, what do we like to say, cool piece or the hook is if you go into step 3 and you find out and determine which standards apply. And you start right at the top, ask the 3 questions. You know, is this content comprised of records maintained in National Archives records? Okay. For us, that answer is usually always no. And will it be public facing? Now, this is the key, because ours is non-public facing. So ours
Okay.
sits behind the firewall, except unless we was on a .com or something like that. So ours is non-public facing, and that's where we get into step 3, or question 3. The official agency communication, which it is technically, and it's not public facing. So we go to question 4, but before we go to question 4, we have to look down at the list of categories. And if you look down at number 8, educational or training materials, and that's us. So pretty much you go to question 4 and it says, yeah, you have to comply.
So right there, number 8. 8 is my lucky number, by the way. If you see number 8, you can see we are deep, and it even says educational webinars.
Mm-hmm.
Hence why whenever I send out recordings, I have closed captioning on my videos. And if you ran an accessibility check on your webinar guide that I sent out, yes, it is accessible. It has alternative text in all your photos. Because if I am nothing, if not ensuring that I am compliant. But this is a really great tool, and I love how easy this is. Like you said, there are so many, I have done a lot of research on accessibility, and there is so much research out there and so many resources where, as you said, you have to literally decipher this legalese. And if you aren't, you know, if you are a layman in accessibility, such as you don't understand all of that mumbo jumbo. So you want to make sure that you have an easy resource. So this is a great one, and you included this in the resources in the webinar guide, correct?
Put it in there as well as the CIO, the Chief Information Officer's website that has the Section 508 website in it. So basically this all deals with just the DoD stuff. Now Section 508.gov is all a federal. The CIO website is DoD. Okay. But everything points back to the same place. Unlike trying to go through Access Board or any of those other sites, I mean, even Adobe has e-learning accessibility stuff. And I find this one to be the most comprehensive and easy to understand, and I like easy.
Yeah, I like easy too. Okay, so when we're going into Blackboard, some of the things that you want to keep in mind, we talked about the photos. And what I mean by that, so I'm going to go in here in this little demonstration course, and I want to find a photo that I can pull up. Watch, I'm going to pull one up, a section, there's not going to be a photo in there.
Show what not to do.
Oh, yes, we can show what not to do. So I'm going to go in here. You can go in, edit your content to check your photos. So that's another thing you can do. You don't have to totally redo everything if you want to make your stuff accessible. All you have to do is go in and check to see what your photos look like. So if you want to check your content, you know, for your photos, just, you know, right click, go to your image. And this is the box I'm talking about. So where it says image description and image title. So your description should be a description of what is in the photo, what it's depicting, and the title is going to be the title of your photo. And sometimes your description and your title can be the same thing.
Yep, absolutely.
So a key thing with that, though, is if you have certain things where you have links embedded in your photos, that is where it's really important to put your alternative text. So in one of my courses, I actually have a photo where I got fancy and I embedded a link to another page in the photo. Well, in order to make sure that that's accessible, I have to put alternative text where not only does it have the title of the photo, the description also says link to whatever the page is.
Exactly.
So when you are putting in your description, you literally want to describe what the purpose of that photo is, as well as what it's depicting for those who are going to have screen readers. Another thing that you're going to see on this page, you want to make sure that you have headers. Blackboard already kind of has those features built into it, so you don't really have to worry about building headers like you would in a Word document. So that is the nice thing for you. But what you do want to be careful of is if you have maybe a list of things, it's very natural for us to want to underline things. So if you have text that does not have a hyperlink attached to it, make sure that you are not underlining it. Because if you have someone who's using a screen reader and you have text that's underlined, it's my understanding that the screen reader is going to read that as a hyperlink. And then you have someone who is visually impaired trying to click on this link that is not actually a hyperlink. So you want to avoid putting content with underlines unless it is a hyperlinked text.
And that also leads into, well, visual cues. You don't want to make text a specific color to indicate some kind of special action or anything like that. Somebody who's colorblind would not know where to go or what to do with that. Or any other kind of object or any interactive object, you wouldn't want it to be bright colors or flashing or anything. You know, less is more sometimes in this case.
Now, there are a couple like videos. So if you do notice that you have videos that are embedded in your courses that do not have closed captioning, sometimes if you're taking the content from another source, they may not have the closed captioning built in there. So you want to be careful. Those are probably the situations where you're going to have to build a transcript if the closed captioning is from an external video and they don't have it built in. So you're going to have to try and find an alternative source to indicate what's being said. And this is a great question that Annie asked. It says, isn't blue text with underline indicative of a hyperlink? Is that standard or no?
Usually that would be standard. If you highlighted some text on a Word document, then you went up and you said insert hyperlink, it will turn that blue with an underline. Now, I believe that in Word you can actually change that to something else, but for the most part the standard is blue underline. And then once it's clicked, gray underline or some other color.
Right. So that would be a case of where if we're going to change a color, that's something that the program does automatically. When you were talking about changing colors, really the colors we want to stay away from were generally those who are colorblind are not able to see are colors like red. Red and green, I know, are two of the most common colors that people have difficulty seeing.
Right.
And also, I've been in classes where there was a color-coded box, and click the red box. Okay, well, if someone's colorblind, you don't want to make something specific to a color, and that's really what we're talking about. Oh, Annie, see, you have your BFF there. He'll be able to take care of you. So Dwayne puts in the comment box, HTML. He's a very wealth of knowledge about HTML links and 508 styles, because I know Mr. Natty worked in our ITU for many, many years, and so he's got a lot of experience when it comes to that kind of content. Now, another thing that we talk about doing closed captioning with videos. If you are embedding a video, I know you talked about having alternative text, and it doesn't have to just be closed captioning. As you said, it can be subtitles. So if you have an audience where you anticipate that they are going to be maybe an international audience, you want to be aware that you have people from other countries that might be watching that content, that's when you're going to want to include, excuse me, that's when you're going to want to include subtitles so that they can still be able to watch the content in their language. Additionally, I believe that you mentioned if you don't have subtitles, as long as you have a transcript of content, then that's sufficient as well, correct?
Yeah, and that's that's kind of a gray area because even though you have a transcript, it doesn't. If you're reading a transcript on a separate page and trying to watch a video and see what's going on there as well, then it's kind of hard to follow along. So the transcript is a okay means or method, but it's not, I don't think it's compliant. So
Okay.
a transcript can be used in many different ways, but I've yet to find out whether or not that can be used as a replacement for your closed captions. You know, closed caption, well, you can have closed captions, open captions, subscripts. We had like 2 or 3 other ones in there. Those are the 3 main ones that I deal with. And you've seen them all on TV when you use them. Subtitles or even closed caption, I can't remember which one, will indicate who's actually speaking. I want to say that the subtitles will actually indicate who's saying something, whereas closed captions just put the audio on the screen, and that's it.
Right. So another thing that I want to point out for, I know you mentioned a little while ago about those who maybe don't have too much dexterity, excuse me. I don't know what it is with this room, but apparently it's getting us all choked up. So for those who don't have a lot of dexterity, and so they may not be able to use a mouse, one thing that Blackboard does have is something called Quick Links. And you can open it at any time with the keyboard. All you have to do is click Shift-Alt-L, and it'll bring up your screen, and it'll have all of the quick links and the shortcuts for how you can set up your content, how you can navigate through your content, and it'll ensure that you are creating areas that someone with a keyboard can actually navigate through. So when you open this window, say that you have someone that they don't want to use a mouse and they want to use their keyboard, they can actually scroll through the screen and select that content just with the use of their keyboard. The other thing that is available, and I've showed you guys this before, is your keyboard accessible reordering. So if you open that window, again, that's when you open that window with your quick links, instead of doing the drag and drop function, you can just go here with this little window with your keyboard, and then you can move your windows by simply moving your arrows up and down. You click enter, and then it'll reorder without you having to do the drag and drop. So several different things that you guys can keep in mind that when you are going through and designing your course, there's all kinds of functions within Blackboard. I really encourage you to look up the Blackboard help sites, where I got a lot of the content that I have in here in your webinar guide is the Blackboard help site, and you type in accessibility and you have several different categories, and they talk about the JAWS screen in your which is your screen reader. It talks about how to make your content or how to use devices for hearing impaired. It'll actually go through the steps to utilize those devices within the Blackboard platform. I didn't include that information in the webinar guide because that's a little more specific to what you might be looking for. One other thing that I did want to show you, and something that I created a couple of years ago, and some of you might have already taken it, is when the Section 508 compliance really started making headway within AETC. we didn't really have a lot of resources. People didn't really know where to go. So I adapted this course that was available through Blackboard. It was a file that we could kind of adapt based on our need. And I have loaded it into our ATC platform. So to get to that, all you're going to do is go to Open Courses, then go down to where it says UDA 508, and then click Enroll. And once you click Enroll, all you have to do is click Submit, and it will enroll you in that course. And it's a self-paced course. There's 4 lessons, and it literally will walk you through universal design, accessibility for online learning, assistive technology, and learning styles. And the resources that Mr. Shipton has been talking about, they are all in this course and then some. So what I really like about this course is that it has everything that you could even ever imagine. So for those of you that develop courses for international students, if you have international students that do partake of your courses, it even talks about different things that you want to be mindful of in regards to culture and different countries and how different cultures perceive color, different type disabilities, learning disabilities, mental health. All of those different things are included within this course, and it goes way more in depth than we could go in an hour. I think that's all I have for as far as Blackboard goes, unless there's anything else that you can think of that you want to add there, Mr. Shipton.
Well, no, I can't really think of anything. What we touched on here is for people to actually take advantage of the tools that they have. I notice, Mr. Daddy, he's a genius in when it comes to coding this kind of stuff, and we're not going that deep, and it's kind of hard to do. But take advantage of the tools that you have in front of you. The Section 508.gov, great site. They even have training on there. Training courses for different things on there, and they're free and self-paced. And the UDA 508 that you have here, I took it at least 2 years ago.
Yep.
So it's great. I loved it. It's fantastic. So and when we think about accessibility, all we do is we think about people with disabilities. But we know that accessibility it's much more than that, than just a way for people with disabilities to actually be able to use the stuff that we use. And so it can also be considered an alternative method for
Learning,
right? So there's a lot of instances where if you comply with Section 508, you comply with, or you can help other learners that have different learning styles. Like closed captioning, for instance. Some people don't like to listen to the audio. They learn better if they actually get to read it.
I'm one of those. I actually will turn a video on mute and I'll read the closed captions rather than listen to the audio portion, because I'm able to retain more from the video, because the audio actually, because I'm one of those, I actually have ADD, and so it's very difficult for me to focus on a video when I'm trying to listen to it and I'm trying to, see what's going on. So having those closed captionings for me allows me to really retain that info. So, that to me is why having these alternative methods of retaining that information is really important. So that's just something to keep in consideration, just accessibility. I noticed when you guys were all going through and you were saying, what you knew about it, a lot of you mentioned hearing and visual impairment, and I know that that's a lot of what we connect with accessibility, but it's so much more than that. And I think it's really important for everybody to be mindful of what you can include, because not only are you going to make it accessible for those who do have disabilities, but you're going to make it more accessible and really more engaging, for those who may not. It's going to make it
Right.
a deeper learning experience
Right.
for those.
And if we look back on it, the universal design, if you build universal design, you're probably going to cover everything. And you have universal design, can lead to usability, which can lead to accessibility. So maybe we just start doing universal design and not worry about accessibility.
I like the way you think. All right. Well, with that, I'm going to go ahead and sign us off. Thank you so much, Mr. Shipton, for joining us today.
Pleasure,
I
totally.
really enjoyed having you today. I know that topics like this can get a little boring and, a little bit deep in the weeds, but thank you for kind of breaking it down for us and really simplifying and giving us some great resources that we can use in order to make our courses more accessible.
And I encourage people to go out and look at those sites and delve into it for themselves, and they'll see how broad this subject is. And I don't think that there's probably maybe 2 people on the planet that are actual experts at it.
No. So, awesome. Well, I'm going to go ahead and call this it. I will go, this has been recorded, so even with our hiccups that we had throughout, I'll go ahead and edit it. And if it's not this week, I will have it out to you guys the beginning of next week, since this is a 3-day week for us here at Keesler. So thank you all so much again, and we will see you next month. Bye.